Hello. I'm going to paint some daffodils today, and I'm going to start. I've done a sketch already, obviously, and I did a little bit of value painting on the sketch so that I could easily welcome to my studio. I'm going to paint daffodils this week, and these are just out of the garden. They're the first set of daffodils this year in April, and I'm going to start with the stems of the flowers inside of this blue crystal vase. We have yellow daffodils that have actually white petals and a yellow center, and I've sketched them, and then after sketching them I did a little bit of value contrast painting to show the shadows. It would just make it easier to paint them later, and in this case I think that the particular colors of the flowers and everything lended themselves to doing a little bit of the shadows ahead of time. I don't always do it that way, but I decided to do it this way, make it faster to paint. So I'm going to start though with the stems because they're in the vase, and so the all glazing, I'm going to take a dark green. I was going to add a little bit of hooker green, but I think I'm going to take primarily a cascade green, and I'm going to take some alizarin crimson, and that makes it almost black. I think you can see that. Those two colors together make a neutral. Whenever you mix certain opposites, they make a neutral. And so just like when you mix burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, you get a neutral. Or if you mix burnt umber with ultramarine, you get a neutral. And so different colors will help to give you those neutrals. In this case, I want it almost black, so I'm mixing together several greens, a kind of bright green, like a cocoa green, and a cascade green, which is very dark, and alizarin crimson is the darkest red. So what I'm going to do with that is paint the some impression in the vase of stems. Now I haven't drawn the stems. This is kind of risky on my part. I haven't drawn the stems, but I'm going to draw them now with the paint. And I'm just going to draw the outsides of some stems, and they should be a little bit uneven. And I'm leaving a light area for the center of some stems. I'm not going to do all the stems, just some. And there's a sort of distortion that happens with the glass. But I'm just going to put in a few. And I've already done a lot of work on this in terms of drawing all those flowers and everything, so I'm hoping that this works well enough. I've got some reflections here, so I don't want to necessarily lose those. Now I'm going to put some lighter color a little bit of lighter color in the middle of the stem. I think this terre verte might work well for that. In actuality, the daffodil stems are pretty dark all the way through, and they're not so brown green as this green. But I just want to do a little bit to get that process started. And let's see, how much do I want to do? Not too much. I have to be careful not to overdo the stem part of this thing. And I also don't want to make it very thick because I don't want it to lift when I put on the glaze above. This paper, Canson, I noticed that one of the nice things about it is that it's easy to do lifting and lift paints, but at the same time there are moments when you don't want the lifting to occur, and so I have to be careful about that. So let's see, I just put some of these behind, like that. I'm just going to indicate those stems. I don't want to do more than indicate them. I think that'll be about all I should do on them. Got a little bit more dark on the sides, just to show some variation in those stems. Okay, that's about it. Good. Now the next thing I want to do is take a dark blue. I think I'll use this this kind of indigo blue, and I'll mix it with a little bit of the Antwerp blue. And I'll paint some of the top of the water. I'm going to leave some places light and some places dark. And I'm going to go over some of these stems. You might say, why did you do that? Now I've got a reflection in the glass in a certain place, so I don't want to cover it up, but I just put a little bit of waterline in there. And I'm just going to carry with some clear water. Blend that a little bit. Okay. And then I'm going to use some of the same down here to show the glass is semi-transparent because of course this is going to be a blue glass vase, but the base of the vase will be pretty dark compared to the rest of the vase. So we'll just get that process started. I've put together this still life over the past 2 days, cutting daffodils from the garden and bringing them into the kitchen and sitting in the kitchen and sketching them. So I think that's a little piece here. Good. And I'll put a little bit of this dark. It's a little bit dark on that edge because that's the edge that's in shadow. So I'll just do that now with this color that is going to be a little bit darker color than what I'm going to use, and a slightly different hue than what I'm going to use for the rest of the vase, which I'm going to use a bit of cobalt. But on this side of the vase I'm just going to put some of this mixture of indigo and Antwerp. I like to enjoy my colors and mix different reds together and different oranges together and let them kind of zing that way, side by side. I think it adds some vibrancy. And I'm just going to blend that edge for now, and we'll deal with the rest of the glass later. But after this is dried. So I'm just going to blend it enough so that we can leave it alone. I'm more used to working with arches. This paper is a little different. It has a different behavior, a little less teeth to it, and I have to be more careful about blooms and lifting and things like that. But it's very bright, and the fact that it lifts easily is very nice when you want to make corrections. And I love the vibrancy of it. It's a very bright white, and it really holds the paint nicely and gives you good color. Okay. Let me just repair that little corner here with some more of that indigo mixture. Indigo and Antwerp. Antwerp's kind of a nice, slightly greenish blue, very intense. Yeah. I'm going to have a little bit of trouble when I do this vase. I can see that because the paper is going to let some of the color lift. But we'll leave that for now. Try to deal with that bloom that's been created, which we definitely did not want. Okay. I'll just go in with a little bit of a dry brush and damp brush and make sure to lift some of that water. There. Okay, that's a start. then with some cobalt, pretty much cobalt blue, because that is what this vase is supposed to be, cobalt blue vase. I'm going to start to bring in some of the cobalt blue and leave around these reflections that are here. And those reflections are actually my kitchen window reflecting on the vase. And interestingly, it reflected on this curved part of the vase in a small way. And then it reflected to be larger and slightly different on the part of the vase that is a little more full and round. So on the neck, the windows reflected, and the same window reflected separately in a different way below. So that's the cobalt blue of the vase. And we want it to be a little bit varied here and there, because it's not a static thing. So there'll be places where it'll be light and places where it will be dark, which is the nature of the glass. So in some places I'll use more water and make a thin wash to cover, like here. And in other places I'll make it a little darker, as if there's some kind of pattern being reflected. So I won't make these soft-edged. I'll make them a little bit geometric and straight-edged. Actually, one of the things that was kind of interesting, but I didn't try to portray it because it was really too complicated, but my whole palette in this area was being reflected with all the colors. It was interesting to see. So. They should be different shapes, not all like that, but different shapes. Then just some white areas are fine to have too. This is a lighter tone. I can always come back again and do a wash over everything if I'm not happy with the way this is going. If the paint will let me do that. I'm just going to make a little slightly blue cast on that reflection. But not too much. A little too much. Because it was actually a very light reflection, really very bright white because the sun was coming in the window. And up in this area, it should be dark because it's in shadow. Some of the violet is showing through, which is fine. It gives it, this is a very soft violet that I made by mixing a little bit of Payne's Gray with a quinacridone violet, and so it's very, and with a lot of water, so it was very light wash, and just put a little bit of that in to show the values, the value areas of shadow in the picture. It looks a little bit too unglass-like for now, but we can always smooth it out later. The thing is to get a sense of it for now. There's certainly a watery feeling down here. And I should continue that stem a little bit so it doesn't look lost in the water. Yeah. I'll continue. Maybe a couple of other stems that need to be continued. Okay. I think that needs to dry before anything more is done on it. I haven't decided yet what color the table will be or what color the wall will be, but certainly there will be a shadow. as there was. The light is obviously coming from the this side here, and it's very bright light leaving this window pattern here. One of the things I will do is I think I should wait till the very end to put in the window. Yeah, to indicate the lines of the window, but let's see. I think I can do that to indicate it now. It was interesting, not until you're sitting there and sketching something do you realize that reflection was so strong. And I kept thinking, do I really want to put that into this? I said, it doesn't even look real. It's going to look false. But, you know, it was just so interesting and odd to have it be one way in the neck and a totally different way below. Both areas reflecting the same window. It's one big window and then two smaller windows on the sides. And oddly, this part didn't really show. So on the top, in the neck, you couldn't see one of the windows. You could only see two. Yeah, that's looks a little bit more windowy, I think. What do you think? And then there was the very heavy lines between the window for the frames between the windows. And those were quite dark on the glass, which also was interesting. I think it'd be nice to let that dry and then just touch it up a little later. Because working wet on wet is not really what I want to do here. I don't want too many soft edges. I want it to be distinct here and there. So I'll have to make that happen a little better when we come back to this. Okay. Hi, I'm just putting the photograph, the vase, sorry. I'm putting the vase of flowers just in the image for a little while I continue to do a little work on I'll move it out of the basic vase area. Any dark, I've talked about some of the colors that I'm using, but it really doesn't matter the precise colors. What matters is that the mixture is in the general framework of the color that you're wanting. So I'm just doing a tiny bit with a bunch of dark greens and some slightly dark blues and some slightly greenish blues. I'm adding a little bit of vinyl over here in this corner where some water lifted. I'll put a little bit of correction here and deepen that corner again. I'm going to deepen this corner over here. And any small brush that's anywhere from a 2 to 4 is probably good for that little final detail work. The mixture that I'm adding right now is a mixture of a little bit of indigo, a little bit of Antwerp blue, a little bit of ultramarine blue, and I'm mixing them together to get a dark enough blue to add some detailed finishing touches on this vase. I mean, it turns out that I wasn't very confident that the marks that I put in there were enough, but it turns out that they're looking pretty good. I'm going to just make a couple of them a little more crisp, like this one, make it a little more crisp here. Just, the eye will wonder what that is reflecting, and I know there were some very precise reflections, including my palette. My palette was over in this area here, and it had all the colors on it, but I think that it would be a bit of a distraction to do that. There were other things in the room that were being reflected. I think I might just do one more mark over here and another one here. Because I don't want the viewer to be too distracted by detail, but yet I want to have a view of some transparency and some reflection. So over here there was reflection from the ceiling area of the room, and there was over here some reflection of clouds. I remember that, but I'm not going to put them in. So I think that this vase, that little bit of preliminary detailing of the windows, which I wasn't certain about, actually worked pretty well. When you stand back at a distance, it worked pretty well. And this, I just want to make this fairly crisp here. Okay. Now the next thing to do is to indicate the shadow. Usually shadows are a little less colorful. So I'm going to make the same basic mixture of blues, but I'm going to put a small amount of alizarin crimson in it to make it slightly more violet. Okay, so I've already got a shape here, and just to avoid making a mess in the wet paint with my hand, I'm going to put this little device, which is a hand rest or an arm rest. Let's see what's the best position for it. Yeah, that's, well, no, not quite. Let's see. I think that'll work okay. So in the part below the water, I'm going to assume there's a fairly defined indication. I'm going to put a little more alizarin crimson in there. It's not as quite as violet as I would like. Okay. I'm going to put an indication of the water line. And I'm going to carry down some of the darker side here. But I'm just going to leave some spaces. I'm not going to try to make the shapes follow the shapes that are in the water, but just to indicate that there is light coming through in places. And I like the fact that this is kind of there. I think I might just carry this a little more that way. There. And then above I'm going to do the same thing, but a little lighter, and carry some of this up, but not as strong, as let more light through. It's a little hard to work. A little more light through, and just make it a little more blue, a little less violet. I should actually begin to show that it's, I'm going to take that water line up a little higher, and because the water is actually closer to the beginning of the neck than I had it there. And I'll drip in a little bit of the darker color and let it diffuse. It's very, I want it to be a very watery shadow with some diversity in it. I think that's probably going to be enough. Let's see, and just blend this out a little bit more. Down here, I'm just going to put a little more shadow, even though there could be a fair amount of light coming through here. I'm just going to bring that down. Put some of those odd shapes in. Okay, so that is the vase and the shadow, and you've gotten to see the daffodils. So you have a sense of the color that they're going to be. I don't really have a reference photo that I'm working from. I'm working from the live flowers. But the sketch was done down in the kitchen. So the the details of the sketch. I'm just going to indicate this table edge a little better. I still haven't decided what color the table will be and the background, but that is the actual edge of the table. I'm going to bring a little bit of color down. And over here the same, I'm going to bring a little bit of color down. That is like shadow color, even though it doesn't matter that I haven't decided about the table color. Because if I decide to put a table color in over this, it'll be a glaze over this, so that shadow will, that indication of the table receding into the background will be okay. I'll put just a little bit over here. I don't want to leave it pure white. Okay, that's a good point for, I'll come in and clean up this edge a little bit after it's dry, because right now I can't really do that. This is a nice little brush. I don't know who made it, I forget. It's all worn off. Some of my brushes are so old, and some of them have been purchased in different countries, because I've worked in over 60 countries on sanitation in slums. And so sometimes I'd be out there and I'd just need a brush and go to wherever I could, if there was a local art store. Not in many places there wasn't, but in some places there was. And pick up whatever brush I could get. So I have brushes from all over, and for many decades I've had them. And then some people have given me brushes when they no longer had any interest in them. So okay, I think that's all I can do on that, and it's interesting how the vase turned out. So I put a little more. I did put a little more color under defining the negative painting around the flowers. So the next step will be the flowers. The stems have been detailed a little bit more, but I think that I better not touch that vase any further or I'm going to make a mess. I fixed up the edge that was messed up here. Still a little bit messed up. Some little messes just keep persisting, so I'm just going to soften that edge there. Okay. And then while I was at it, I thought I would do a slight amount of scrumbling with my rigger brush, like this, in the white. It's a long, thin brush, so it creates some very interesting marks on its point. There's a little piece of hair from the brush. And also it lets me splatter nicely if I want. I just want to create a little bit of texture, and then where I think there's too many of those splatter marks, I just go in with the rigger and move the paint around a little bit. I don't want my corners to be too bright and white, so I like to bring a little color in them so that it keeps the eye in the center of the painting. Also, I want a little bit of color under the vase in front to connect the vase to the table, so there's not a sense of it floating. And I'll just bring down a little bit of color. I'm using mostly manganese blue for this because it granulates, and I like the bright color as opposed to the many darker blues in here. And so I have a little bit of the violet that was in the shadow. I'm also glazing over some of that violet with the manganese blue. To give it a little bit of bluish tone here and there. Okay, and in some of the white reflections, covering some of those, not all, with manganese blue, so that there's a sense of diversity in the shadows reflections too. Okay, I think, so this is just scrumbling, what we call scrumbling when you just go like this with the side of the brush, the side tip of the brush. You don't want to do it to the point where you're scrubbing and damaging the brush, but it creates nice marks. I still have the potential, if I want, to go back in later and glaze with another color and have all these marks be like shadow marks from the, but I may just leave it like this because I like the lightness of it against the darkness of the vase. I'm just going to make sure there's no white marks in these corners here. I prefer not to have them. Okay. It's just to keep the eye of the viewer inside the painting and not traveling out into empty spaces, taking a journey into the empty space of the corner. Picking up some of the water here so that it doesn't create a bloom coming back into the painting as the rest of the painting dries and bulks up a little bit. Sometimes the color on the edge can travel back into the painting and make a bloom. So there's a preliminary, here's a little splatter that was just a little too dark. So I'll leave them there, but lighten some of them. So this is a number 2 Escoda rigger brush. You see how very long the bristles are. And it allows you to make very fine calligraphic marks, as well as to do that splatter nicely. And I can show you on I have a piece of paper here. I'll just use a piece of office paper. I'll show you, I'm going to cover up my painting. Hopefully I haven't covered it with any paint, okay, on my palette. Sometimes when so I'll just show you how that looks, that rigger splatter looks. So I take some paint. See how nice the splatter is? It's quite different than the toothbrush splatter. I'm going to show you that as well, because the whole process of this video work is to learn. But in your process of watching and learning, here's a toothbrush bladder. This is a very soft toothbrush. That's a very nice soft splatter, almost like an airbrush. And then you have sometimes, this is a very much stiffer toothbrush, and I'll get a little different effect. Pretty similar, but anyway, the you get to practice with your tools. You know which ones will do which things for you. And you can use a piece of office paper or the back side of a painting that you're... I know a number of my paintings on the back side, I have marks from doing this. But here you can see that. Okay. So the next step in this process will be, as I mentioned before, to do the flowers. So for the moment, I'm just going to put the flowers there and leave the rest of the painting to dry, but leave you with the view of the flowers and the colors of the flowers. Okay, I've got the flowers here just so you can keep in mind the color, and am ready to start doing work on the flowers. So I worked a little bit with one, because unfortunately by deciding to, and let me see if I can make this zoom at all, by deciding to do some of the value with a violet tone, I probably should have gone with more of a neutral. But anyway, because I went with a violet instead of a gray, I have to be careful what color I put on top of the violet. I don't want to have mud, and I want it to be somewhat close to the nature of the flower that we have here. This is I'll just lay down one of them so that you can see it a little, maybe a little better. But it's almost a white, but it's got some gray tones, some slightly greenish tones, and then the center is a very pale yellow. Again, in the center here, very, very greenish tones in there. So the trick is to capture those while I have a violet there. So anyway, I've mixed together, I've tried different yellows on my palette to see which one would give me a good result for the center. And for the center, I'm going to go with an Aurelian. It's a very pale yellow. See, that is the Aurelian yellow. That's Aurelian yellow. And if I put water in it, it's very, very pale and transparent. So that is what I'm going to use on the petals of the flower. And for the center, I'm going to use this cadmium yellow, which is a little less transparent. It's semi-transparent, so it's semi-opaque. And it's a little brighter. And of course, cadmium yellow is made with real cadmium, so it's not a paint you want to be using your fingers or putting your fingers in your mouth. And then for the center, I'm taking the cadmium yellow and adding, so it's a mixture of cadmium yellow and cobalt blue. This is the cobalt blue. Naturally, that's the cobalt blue. That's the cobalt blue. And when I mix it with the cadmium yellow here, I get this greenish tone, which is very close to the center of the flower. So the, like the trumpet part of the flower, trumpet shape with all the ruffles, is the cadmium yellow and the Aurelian yellow. So the process is very straightforward. To simply use these colors, and let me see which brush I want to use. I see that the one that I wanted to use, I've taken to my life drawing group and used it there. So here, let me try this one for the stems, because I don't need it too small. So I've done one and it worked out pretty well. So I'm just going to go on these stems one flower at a time. I mean on these petals one flower at a time with that Aurelian yellow. See how soft it is. And I'm just going to, I don't have to be too precise. I don't mind if I go over the edges a little bit. And I don't mind at all also, because it's so light and so transparent, it doesn't even matter if I go over the center of the flower. But the main thing is just to put some of this soft yellow on these petals. I'm going to move this for now. You really don't need it there anymore. Since I have already done my shadows here in this this toned down light violet color, which I made from mixing a little bit of Payne's Gray with a little bit of violet to get a little bit of a grayish violet. It's a little more violet than I probably should have. So that is pretty close to what I'm wanting to have here. I'll put a little more yellow in some of them. In fact, it's not a bad idea that it's a little uneven and there's more yellow in some and less in others. That's enough yellow. They're pretty close to white, so I have to be careful. I don't want to go too yellow. All right, then the next step is to take a little smaller brush. I think this one will work. It looks like it's about a size 2. And go with the cadmium yellow in the center. And I'm just going to go around here. I'm going to leave some, try to leave a place for this, I think they're called stamens, in the center to be able to be painted in. And so I'm just going to do them, the little ruffles in the center. Don't forget everything will dry lighter. So leave some little bits of white. Some can be with a little more water, some with a little less water. That'll change on how dark or light it is. But it doesn't have to be too precise. The drawing below is already very, very precise. And the shadows are already indicated in there. So the main part of the work that's going to happen is to change a little bit the color of the shadow and work a little bit on the shadow. And I'm going to do that with that green that I showed you and some blue. So there I have probably enough cadmium yellow. So I'll take a little bit more now and go around again and put some dots of color here and there, not throughout the entire thing, that are a little more strong, a little less water. Put some almost, some of that color straight from the tube. Get a little bit of bright yellow here and there on those ruffles that are at the edge of the flower, so that the distinction between the central flower being yellow and the petals being very, very pale, almost white, is made, that distinction. So it's subtle, but little bits of bright yellow toward the end of the ruffle will help to highlight those ruffles. I think you can see that starting to emerge already, a sense of the shape of the flower by just that little bit of extra yellow here and there, but not everywhere. Okay, so that's a start. I think flowers are starting to emerge. Then the next step is that green that I showed you that I mixed from cobalt blue and cadmium yellow. And I put some of that green in the center. It's a very pale, it's a very nice green right in the center of the flower for some reason. This is where it helps to have the real flowers right there and not a photograph. So you can look very, very closely. These daffodils came out of my garden. It's first week of April. We just had Easter 2 days ago, and it's the time of year where we've got the daffodils coming. The first crop of daffodils got killed by a frost and they all fell over and died. But the ones that are coming in a little bit later are a little more lucky. I'm painting this in like the crevice, so it's also indicating where the flowers are, the direction that they're pointing in. So that gives a sense there. Now the stamens themselves are yellow, but since they have a little bit of a shape to them, I'm going to see if I can carefully. Some of them have a little bit of brown on them, so I'm going to use a little bit of a reddish brown, like a red oxide or a red ochre or a fire ochre. And I'm just going to use that and indicate them. That one came out pretty nicely. So I'm going to leave white here and there. I'm going to grab a pair of glasses so I can see those little tiny lines. Okay, here I go. I don't wear them very often, but oh, that's much better. Yeah, just want to make sure that I get these pretty close to being right. Because the little bit of reddish orangey color on the stamens is not at the base of the stamens, and it's not at the very tip of the stamens. At the very tip, they're actually yellow. But there's a place just before the yellow where they seem to be a little reddish or brownish. Anyway, so just putting a little bit of that color here and there, and voila. Not very precise, not doing them just like they are, but enough to just indicate that they're there. Hopefully. That's the idea. Most of this is trying to create an illusion. I have to reach around so as not to be in the middle of the camera, so it makes it a little convoluted sometimes. Okay, good. So that's beginning to happen. Now the next step is to I've already got this kind of violet tone going on here, so what I'm going to do is take my manganese blue, which is a little bit of a turquoise blue, and I'm going to use that over some of these shadows to intensify the look of the flower with some blue tones. So I'm not going to cover up the, I'm not covering up the, this is where I'm going to move the flowers in front of me so I can see them there. I don't think they're in your way. No, good. So this just allows me to see them clearly, because I want to do these shadows without overdoing them. And having the real flowers right there is helpful. And so I'm using some water to have these. I don't want these lines to be too strong, so I'm making sure to put in plenty of water. I just want them in some places to, because the shadows that I put in already are very soft, and I'm going to put in a little bit more definition, and slightly different from what's underneath, so that there's still the violet happening in some areas, but in other areas there's the blue over the violet, so giving a different sense of color. I like the idea of glazing, because then you see both colors with whatever is below coming through a little bit and being affected by what's above. Yeah, so that's, you see how that changes that flower a bit from the ones that are. So this one has been done and this one has been done out of the whole group. And the other thing that I want to do is use the same blue and come in and define some of these wrinkles a little more clearly. Because this is the ruffles. I want to show some of the ruffling, some of the edging, but not all of the edging, just some of it. Indicate those ruffles. Okay, like that. And I'm doing that with manganese blue. Here, like on this one, I'll just do some of the edge of the ruffles and some of the wrinkles in the little trumpet center. Not all of them, but just some. Now I'm going to stand back and look at that and see, is it okay? It's not perfect, but see, I'm just put a little more indication of some of the veins. It's a little more indication of some of the petal behavior. Yeah, and maybe let's see, I might need just a bit more central definition. I find daffodils to be a bit difficult to do because of their shape and whatever. If you don't get it right, they don't look real, they look false. Now I think what I'm going to do is also make some cobalt blue on my palette and do a few bits of darker. That's a little too dark. Water that down. Make some of those shadows just a little bit darker. See how that works. What I'm going to do is fiddle with a couple of flowers and then do the rest off camera once I see that the basic approach is working well. Okay, so I'll take a little more cobalt blue and just go in between some of these wrinkles where there's shadows. Because one doesn't have to define the whole circle, but if you can get part of the circle being a little more detailed, then the viewer's eye, you see that already, even though I'm not going to do any of this, but just doing a bit on part of the flower, helps to enable the viewer. Just do a little bit here, a little darker here. Then the viewer will automatically begin to I think I'll I've got to be careful not to overdo it, but I think I can do a little bit on this petal here. It's such a big, important central petal, so I want to do a little bit on that one. And then I just put a few dabs here, not much at all. And a little bit right here. Nothing more. And I think that petal probably has enough. And I shouldn't risk too much more. Maybe up here at the crevice a tiny bit at this top of this petal here. And there, that's more than enough for that. Okay, little dot in the center, that needs to be a little darker. This is all being done with the cobalt blue. So there were 3 levels. There was in the center the green that was made, and then a little bit of manganese blue. Now a little going in closer with the cobalt blue. And I think that probably the rest should remain lost edges. So let's go down here where we've already done the green and a little bit of the red ochre. We've done some manganese blue. So let's just go in with the final, a 3rd layer of just a little bit of the darker blue, the cobalt blue, which is a cooler blue than the manganese. And I'm doing it in a concentrated way, less water, putting in a little bit more deeper, darker shadow in a few spots. Some people would do this very, very loose and have a lot of lost edges. I would like to do that. I seem to be unable to let myself stay that loose. So I'm doing it a little more precise. Not necessarily that this is the only way or the best way, but anyway, seems to be the way that I always go. So I like to see some edges, even though my heart says stop and spray it and let it be much less precise. So maybe I'll get there by the time I'm 80. That might be nice. Okay, so I'm just doing a few ruffles here and there by adding a little bit of negative painting and intensifying a few shadows here and there. I better stop soon. Overdoing it. Yep, oh, that was overdoing it. So I just softened it. Okay. I think that's probably enough. So these 2 are done. Okay, I'm going to do one more. And then I'll go off camera and finish up the rest. And then we'll come back and see what to do about the background. So here is the center of this flower. And then I'll take a little bit of the manganese blue, as we did before, and put some of that manganese blue, which is kind of a, not a turquoise, it's not a teal, but it has a slighter greenish tint compared to the cobalt, which is just a straight primary blue. Probably the most, just straight medium primary blue. So now I'm taking the cobalt, I'll stick with the manganese, doing some shadows here and there, leaving some violet, but putting some of the blue over violet in order to transition that violet into a more appropriate shadow color for this flower. So, but still leaving some violet. So I questioned my decision to make it a slightly violet tone, grayish violet tone, rather than a straightforward gray without any cast of violet in it, but I don't know, my heart said go with a little bit of violet, so I think it's working out pretty well. So that's with the manganese blue now, and now I'm going to go back with the cobalt blue and put in some dark indications of the ruffles here and there, not everywhere, but just in some places. Provide a little bit of the wrinkles here and there, just with a little bit of this cobalt blue. And it's changing some of the violet shadows that I'd already been putting in and making them more detailed with a finer brush and a darker color and the blue tone of the manganese, the cobalt. So let's see, I think I can put in a little vein here. And the little tip of the flower there. A little tip there. And a little bit of the edge of a flower there. And then some this is indicating a flower that's behind and not completely seen, so I'll just put that in there. So here we have a group. Seems to be that this group is just about ready. Okay. So when I look on camera, that's let me see. I'll zoom in a little bit if I can find the zoom thing. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit. There. So you can see how that is moving along. This flower, this and this, these three are probably pretty close to being done. And I'm just going to go in with the manganese blue shadows, and then move in with a little darker highlights made with the cobalt blue. Now if we are, it's a little hard to tell. I just want to show you those two colors that I'm adding. This is the manganese blue, so if I put it on my palette, here it is. You see? You see the color? It's never going to be exact on the camera. And here versus the cobalt. So you can see why I'm using the manganese blue to make some light shadows over the violet. It's changing it a bit. Adding some highlights to the violet shadows that were already done. And then I'm coming in with the cobalt blue to add some fine, precise lines that are darker and are cooler. I would say that the manganese blue is warmer. Here, do I need something in there? No, I think I'll leave it. Okay, so that's it. I'll do the others off camera, and then we'll come back and do the background. And I'm not sure yet what color the background will be, but I want it to be something dark against the bright flowers, and something different from the darks of the vase and the darks of the table and the shadow. So maybe the thing to do would be to go with a real neutral, like a Payne's gray, or a shadow violet. What's called a shadow violet. I don't think we'll go into any brown tones. I don't think we'll go any red tones. I don't think I'll do any yellow tones. So maybe the thing to do would be to go with a Payne's gray blue hue, which I'll show you on another palette. If I can find an empty space, I'll put it on this palette for you. This is the blue palette. I'll put it on that palette, but it's the, there it is. It's like a bluish black, and it's like it's a sort of almost an indigo. Okay, so that color, but more watery and more of a wash. So that'll probably be the background. I might test it on another piece of paper, because once so much work has been done on this, I don't want to make a mistake in the choice of the color for the background. So I might put it on another piece of paper and hold it up against that to see if that works. Okay, we'll come back with you when all the flowers are ready. Have a nice day and see you soon. Well, I have finished the flowers using the colors that I talked about, putting in a few places with a little bit of orange here and there. Just, I'll show you the faintest touch of orange here and there. To just liven up the color just a little bit. So it takes away a little bit of the greenish tint here and there. Even put some on top of the blue, on top of the violet. Just very little here and there. I know I'm a little bit crazy for color, but sometimes it just perks it up. Now, the big question is, I realize I have a serious dilemma. I'll put a few bits of orange here and there in the background. And the dilemma is the background color. What should it be? How about a little bit of orange here? I've got to be careful to control myself. A little bit of orange here and there. I think you can see what's going on with that. Just kind of, and sometimes in the pedal, sometimes in the trumpet. It just warmed it up a little bit. Takes away a little bit some of the greenish cast that was here and there. Tones down the violet here and there. Brings in just a little bit of warmth that wasn't there. Okay, so that's pretty much the flowers are done. Now the major dilemma is what color to do the background. So I traced the mass of flowers, put it on a piece of paper, cut out the tracing, and I have a bit of color here. Now, one of the things you could do is have a lot of colored paper and see what you think, but I'm really tending to, I'm looking at some of my colors and comparing them. Blue would not work. That blue would not work. Brown would be very yucky. Not green. I'm really liking this. I'm also, to some extent, liking this. But blue and orange, this is Sennelier orange, this is cadmium yellow. This is New Gamboge. Blue, we have blue and yellow, and we have violet, blue and violet and yellow for the most part in this painting. Now, if we look at the color chart, okay, we have this blue, we have this violet, and we have this yellow. But mostly we have blue and yellow. Okay, mostly we have blue and yellow. And here, the opposite is this red. I think there's a side of me that says this cadmium red might be good. But it is such a big decision that I'm going to first put some paint. Let me see, I should lay down, I'm going to lay down this piece of paper so that I don't get anything. I'm going to put some color. I shouldn't go too close to the edge because I might then get it on the painting. I'm going to put some color on this piece of paper and see what I think. I'm going to put some red over here. And I'm going to, and just lay it down and see what I think before I make any decisions on this, because this is a very big decision. Maybe not. I mean, the white looks okay. One could go with something softer. Maybe I'll try on the other side of that piece of paper a softer version of that, a watery version of that. Let's see how that works. On this side here, I'll do a kind of watery version. of that. It might work better. Let's see. I suppose if I were a master painter, maybe if I ever get to be a master painter, maybe by the time I'm 80, I would know for sure what I wanted to do. But I have to be careful not to get any paint on my paper. I see some of that paint. I don't know if I don't want to get it on the paper. Okay, seems to be not looking a mess now. Let's see, how does that look? That might work. Yes, that might work, and I think that I'll just be bold, and that's what we're going to do. Okay, so now, different brush, with a little bigger brush, lots of water. I'm going to start over here, lots of water, and I'm going to go for it. That's a scarlet red, and I'm just going to drop that in, but not right up next to the flowers. I'm going to let it be soft. And I want it to be some distance from the flowers, so I'll just take a paper towel, make sure it's leaving some space. And then I'm going to take some water and soften that edge, soften that little bit of color to go near the flower, but not very much. I really want to keep it separate. Soften that, keep it apart. Yeah, I think that for me is working. Just dropping in a very thin wash of the scarlet. It's sort of like a reddish orange. Not quite bright red, but I think that actually is my Sennelier orange on my palette. Sometimes I can't remember which color I plopped down on my palette, but I think that might be the Sennelier orange. It's somewhere between a Sennelier orange and a cadmium red. But I'm putting it in very lightly. And one of the things I am going to do is probably put a fine mist. Put a little more in the corner over here. This might be a fun time to think about using my blender brush. I'm always looking for an opportunity to use my blender brush. You can also use a hockey brush. I have a blender brush. It's like a makeup brush. Let's see if I can soften it. It's not working very well. It's not bad, but not great. Yeah. Sometimes does wonderful things, but not this time. So let me put a little more color down here. Actually, it did a nice job of kind of blending that. Okay. This paper, I mentioned color does lift. I have to be so careful when you go over with another layer. Just kind of lifts. I'm going to try the blender brush here. No, maybe I can get that to be a little softer. I want it to be very soft. The flowers are fairly precisely defined, and yeah, the blender brush is doing a nice job. So you can just look for it under that kind of name if you're interested. It's called a blender brush. You can also use a hockey brush. Let me show you that. Use where's my hockey brush? It's not here. Okay. Well, you can also use a hockey brush. It should be there. Okay. That's looking kind of nice. I want some more water in here. A little more on the more white showing. I've got the camera sitting on the board, so can't really lift the board and spray with my spray gun. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Maybe come in a little closer and maybe come in a little bit darker, because you'll remember that the light is on this side going toward that side, so we can come in with a little more color on the shadow side. And I'll come in a little closer to the flowers on the shadow side. That isn't a rule. There are no rules. I'm just doing it because it's my preference. At least for this painting this time, I think. Yeah, I think I like the fact that there's a little bit of diversity of the value in this color, and with it getting darker as it moves toward this edge. By just having the color be with less water. I think I'll continue that. Okay. And I'll carry a little bit of reflection down into the table from the wall. Okay. I think that works for me. I want to be careful about the background on this, because a lot of time went into doing the vase and the flower, and I like the way it turned out, so now I have to wipe this so it doesn't pull back into the painting. There. I'm trying to get in close there with the brush. I mentioned that this paper, the paint, does lift when you go over it. Lifting is very easy on this, which is always nice to know. Some papers it is, and some papers it's not. But even when you're not wanting to lift, sometimes on this paper the color lifts because that is its nature. So, yeah. Anyway. So I'm trying to get this to transition well. It's not exactly happening, but let's see if it happens with the blender brush. Can try it. Not very much. Moves it around. That's an interesting behavior. I don't mind that. That's kind of fun. Almost like a reverse of the flowers. Let me continue that. This is one of those times when I'm always feeling like, thank you, watercolor. That's kind of a happy accident too. From my dancing partner, the watercolor. Okay, let's go up into the other area and continue that whole background thing up here. Okay. Now clean the brush and move some of that color in toward the flowers. And I'm going to, as I go up to the top of the paper, I'll lighten the color. Okay, so I'm doing a little negative painting around this flower here. That is on the side. Yeah, good. So that's working out pretty well. Just once again clean this tape from sending any pooled water back into the painting. Avoid creating a bloom, which I would not want. So let's see, we'll try to transition this color nicely up here. Yeah. And then soften it as we move up. So it's not so dark up here. And letting it gradually move into this other side and try to have the transition be such that they are matching. How about that? Let's see if we can get that to happen. Oh, the struggles, the struggles. But that's so much better than the horrors, the horrors. Thank you, watercolor. You didn't behave too badly this time. Let's see how you're doing. And a little bit of misting with some, with my toothbrush, I think will work. That's a piece of dirt there. Will work very nicely. I did a little bit of misting down here with the manganese blue, and it came out very nice. So when it's dry, I can do that. Add just a little bit of mist. I think I'll just do mist with a soft toothbrush rather than splatter with a brush. Yeah, I like that. I like that look. I like what the, let's see if I can get the blender brush to do something interesting again. Let it do its thing. It did some interesting things down there. I like that. I wonder if I can get it to do anything interesting over here. Not really. That's all right. We'll just put a little bit of color down here to make it a little more gradated. Not too soft everywhere, but just a little bit of gradation here and there. And I'll try to see if I can get that to happen the way it did over there. Yeah, sort of. Yeah, it's close. Nice. It's good to have fun with it. It isn't, in this case, the paint is really decided. The paint and the paper has a little odd behavior sometimes. So the paint and the paper are participating in this little dance. And stepping on my feet now and then. But that's okay. They have a personality of their own and want to assert themselves every now and then. So I have to let them do that. Put a little bit, I don't want to have too much of a white spot there. I want to put in a little more color down here too. A little more color down here, I like that. Yeah, I like that color down there. And I think I'll put a little bit of the mist of that color down here too. I'm going to do a little bit more in the corner up here. Now, one thing one can, it's a little bit too spotty. It's hard to make this wash work on the flat. Let's see. A bit more spotty than I like. Bring down a little bit more scrumbling down here. Tiny bit here and there. See this? Just doing a little, it's as if that color is coming down here and carrying out. I like that. Put a little tiny bit of that background also coming down in here. Just a small amount, like almost like a reflection. And harmonizing those colors. Okay. It's subtle, hopefully, but enough to be interesting and not too boring. Some calligraphic marks here and there. Bring some movement into this with the tip of the brush and the very watery mixture of that color. Now let me show you with the toothbrush what I'm going to do. I've got a nice soft toothbrush. I think I must have gotten it in a plane or something. Nice soft toothbrush. So what I need to do is take some paper and cover those flowers. All right, because I don't want any of this spray to get on them. And make a little pool of the color with water on my palette. And stick my toothbrush in it. So I've made a little pool here of that color. And I'll stick my toothbrush in it. Gotta make sure it's not too wet, otherwise it'll just... And let's see how that works. Yeah, that looks like a nice mist. I want to get a little more color. Yeah. And I'm going to bring a little down here. Yeah, that's good. Great. And I'm going to put this like this here on the flowers, because I seem to have an area here where I didn't get any color. I'll cover the rest with my hand. Yeah, yeah. There you go. You see that? Need a little more. I'm going to cover that flower. Cover the flower here. And meanwhile, my hand is getting covered with the mist. Yes! I think that's working. So let's do a little more. I don't think there's any paint on that side. Let's hope. Cover those flowers. Cover the vase. And do some mist over here. Yeah. So even though it was kind of, paper didn't give me a nice even wash, I think with the mist, it looks pretty good. I'll get another clean sheet of paper rather than take a chance. That's the tracing paper. So I'm going to put a clean sheet and cover here. Okay. So I'll have some mist there too. I like that. That's going to be, it's a nice. That's nice. And I think I'll do that. I'll put some here. And now the only thing I have to make sure is I don't have any wet paper. Let me just go over it with a paper towel. Make sure I don't get any color where I don't want it. So, okay, so I do want some on the top. And there, now I'm going to use my little wonderful toothbrush. Cheapest, softest airport or hotel toothbrush. Turns out to be wonderful. How about that? Now, it still needs a little bit of work to smooth things out. Let's see if I can get it to be just a bit better. And also make some, I like re-wetting some of this spray and creating a little bit of scrumbling here and there. So I'll do a little bit of that. Create some sense of pattern. a little bit too much. As long as you take your time and approach these things a little step at a time, there's usually room for some changes to be made. This could use a little more color, a little more pattern there. A little scrumbling here and there. Just to have it not be too flat and too consistent. I like a little bit of texture and pattern and scrumbling. Because these flowers are so, daffodils are not floppy flowers, they're kind of rigid, sometimes a little plastic looking. I do love them, but they aren't soft and floppy like some other flowers. They've got a very, like orchids and irises, they've got a very distinct shape. And I think it's sometimes, for me, I like to do some unpredictable things around them because they're so rigid. I don't mean to call you rigid, darlings. I'm sorry about that, but you know, you are a bit rigid. What can I say? Yeah, I think this is beginning to look a little more, I mean, it's a bit crazy. It's turning into a pretty lively background, but you can see what I'm doing. And it's a bit risky, you know, to play around like this, and we wonder, oh, is it going to be okay? Are you overdoing it, you know? But it's all one color, and it's fairly pure, and it's still fairly light, so it's not turning into mud. And the worst that can happen is I have to go in and scrub out some of this, but I think it's all going to work. What do you think? I know you think I'm crazy. That's what happens at 2 in the morning. Yeah, it's starting to look fairly harmonious to me. I think this is a better alternative than the kind of Payne's gray wash that I was thinking about before. A lot more risky, but nice. We're in that corner. I think I'd like to take a slightly different shade of red. Maybe a little, yeah, I'm going to bring in a little bit of alizarin crimson and add it to that. And just change it a bit as I move down and away over here. And so I'm just scrumbling with my brush, having this, you know, this flexible, diverse behavior with the brush here and there with the point of the brush. Using this sometime, not the side so much, but the point of the brush. And just creating an additional set of patterns. The mist is still there. I'll do a little negative painting around that flower. The mist is still there, but in some areas you see it, and in some areas you see the scrumbling. And I'll do a little bit of the scrumbling down here. It just helps to soften that shadow edge. Okay. Yeah, I like that. I like that. So I added a little bit of alizarin crimson, which is a dark red, to the Sennelier orange, which is just a shade of orange separate from the scarlet. And bringing that, some of that, carrying some of that down here and there. Not everywhere, making it diverse here and there. Okay. And I did put a little bit of light manganese blue underneath as if it's a reflection. And remember, the reflection is always coming to the viewer, whereas the shadow is going away from the light wherever the light is. The light is over here, but the viewer is always in front of the painting and the reflection is always coming to the viewer, in the direction of the viewer. So therefore there's a little bit of reflection here to the viewer. Just as there from the wall, there's a little bit of reflection on the table toward the viewer. Okay, I think that's about it. Yeah, I think that's about it. I like it. I like that background. What do you think? You know, it's a little crazy. Well, we'll look at it after it dries. Remember, everything will dry later. And I don't think I need any more mist, and I don't think I need any more scrumbling. But, yeah, well, I don't think I need anything darker in this corner or here. I think it works. So, this is the finished painting. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for joining me.